So this idea of the fact that we're all biochemically different. Every single one of us on this planet is biochemically different. And there's this idea that one person, for example, me being a so-called expert in this field, that I might happen to know what you should eat versus the next person, which is actually a crazy notion, because in fact, only you will know what is absolutely ideal. I know what's ideal for me, but we very often we get into this way of thinking where, and this is the problem with the diet industry per se, is, I write a book, I have one way of doing it, and the way that I do it worked for me, so I write about it, and then everyone else comes in and they follow it. And for some people it'll work, but for others it won't, because we're all biochemically different. So to my mind, it's much better to say, well, your body is unique, your needs are unique, so why don't we tune in and try and understand what the body is telling you in terms of the symptoms it'll give you after eating, that will give you an indication of whether or not what you just ate was correct for you. And that, to me, makes a lot more sense than just sort of following some idea. Even the standard straight keto thing, I've found that I have a lot more room to play with on the keto diet than a lot of other people might, just because I've got a good blend of, I seem to have a capability of utilizing carbohydrates. And yes, I mean, I'm busy and all the rest, but not to the extent that, another person might be. And yet I can handle the carbs quite well. So I'm going to sneeze. Oh no, it's gone. Okay, so we're going to assess. Well, I'm going to show you how to assess yourself before you eat, so that you understand how to put together a meal that will serve you. It's no good just throwing a meal together because that's what you've got in the fridge and then hoping it's going to work. You really want to have an idea of what's going to work for you in the future. So we have to go through the process of understanding that and experimenting with it. So we get to the point where, for me these days, I know exactly what a meal should look like before I even get to it. And it's dependent on my level of hunger, just in general, my appetite, what I've done during the day, because it's a very intuitive process now. For a lot of people, they're not at that point where they are able to be intuitive, and we need to bring that back into our choices or our lives in terms of making choices around food. We're going to assess you after you eat to make sure that what you did assess yourself to eat has actually worked for you or not. We'll talk a little bit about how much, because that's a question that always gets asked, and I think it's an interesting one anyway. And then we're going to talk about eliminating cravings and how to manage the sort of evening meal, because there are some things to be aware of. So, as I've said, your body has a unique food language. It's going to give you feedback. It's going to tell you whether what you ate was right. It's going to tell you in very specific ways in terms of energy, in terms of satisfaction, and in terms of emotional well-being. Those are the three areas that it tends to communicate with you through. And the concept for this idea of your body's food language actually is one of the courses that I did when I last lived in London, was called the metabolic typing. So I'm what they call an advanced or comprehensive metabolic typing advisor. And I don't really use it very much, except in the sense of understanding the biochemical differences. I found it a little bit too clinical and a little bit too, I like to have a softer approach to diet. I'm not really interested in telling clients they need 7.5 almonds with, 2 grams of banana and 10 mils of, whatever. It's too clinical for me. I'd rather people learn to be a little bit more relaxed and to gauge in a more intuitive way what they need. So I don't tend to use the sort of extreme version of the program, but it makes a lot of sense to me that there is this language and that we can tune into it. So William Wilcott was the one who basically came across this idea. Very, very interesting work. As I said, mostly people tend to kind of go, oh, what's in the fridge? Let's put something together. And they don't necessarily think about what would be ideal and what wouldn't. And actually, mostly people don't know what would be ideal and what wouldn't be, because they haven't worked it out. Because actually, as far as they know, you should just eat this amount of carb, this protein, this fat, according to Tim Noakes or, you know, me or the next person, or, you know, which are guidelines. There should just be guidelines, and then we work out beyond that. So yeah, we need to work out the ratios of the macronutrients that you need before you eat, so that we can fuel you correctly. And that can be difficult sometimes, because it could be that for some people, their appetite remains constant through the day. For others, it's fairly variable or varied, and it depends entirely on the individual. Okay, so, and I'm going to send these to you in hard copy, so that you've actually got physical feedback notes that you can use. And you might want to just print a number out of the before and the after, and then maybe just spend a month filling them in. You know, keep a hard copy or fill them in online, just keep copies. And then you can start to appreciate whether there are patterns. Every time you have I don't know, let's say steak with rice, you have fantastic results. If you have that meal in the evening, but if you have it at lunchtime, you don't do so well on it. That would be a very interesting and useful thing to reflect on. So yeah, the feedback is what you're looking for, because it will help you determine what you're going to eat. So when you come into a meal, typically speaking, you guys are skipping breakfast. So we're talking about lunch and dinner primarily. But even if you were going to have breakfast, you'd still do this. So in those three areas, appetite, energy, and taste, we start with appetite. Could you eat a hamster or could you eat a horse? So, you know, where are you in terms of appetite? Starving, iffy, or somewhere in between. So you're going to score yourself between 1 and 7. Okay, 1 is very low, can't be bothered, can't be asked to eat. 7 is, I literally am going to eat the table if I don't get food soon. Energy, could you go out and do a workout? Are you feeling kind of revved? Have you got energy, or you just, you know, there's nothing there, or somewhere in between? So again, you're going to score yourself out of 7. 1 is always on the low side, 7 is always on the high side. And then taste. If you had, I always say, imagine you've got a private chef in your kitchen. How nice would that be? What would you ask him or her to make you? Would it be a really, really decadent kind of meal? So for me, it's the salmon, rosti, avo, cream cheese, oof, all of that stuff, which is just right up my alley. Or a bowl of vegetable soup with, you know, a bit of coconut fat in it, or something like that, or somewhere in between. And again, you're going to score yourself between 1 and 7. Okay. So you've now got these 3 areas that you're working through, and you're going to then look at your scores for them. So when you tally them up, so your lowest score can be 3 and your highest score can be 21. So anywhere between 3 and 7, your ideal meal is going to be high in carbs, okay, and lower in fats. Now, it doesn't mean crappy carbs. It doesn't mean junk carbs. It doesn't mean breads and pastas, and it means something different. And we'll talk through that now. And it's moderate in proteins, okay? So there's nothing big and fancy happening on the protein and fat side. Between 8 and 14, you're going to be midway between the two. And then 15 to 21, you're definitely going for higher fat, lower in carbs, and then probably somewhere moderate to, you've got to experiment a little bit with this protein model here. So as an example, and we'll go through this, let's say I've got salad in the fridge, and actually I feel like salad today, but my appetite is very, very small. I'm going to, whether it's small, whether it's moderate, or whether it's extremely high, I'm still got a salad that I'm going to put together, okay? I can do a salad for a low fat, and I can do a salad for a high fat. So in the case of a very low score, I'm doing a little bit of avo, so there's a bit of fat and carb in there. I've got a few olives, chicken breast, which is a light meat, so not a huge amount of what we call purines in that. Your protein basically is if we say it's a high purine protein, it means that the amino acids are very densely packed in that food, almost like sardines in a tin. Whereas a low purine protein is they're much kind of less sardined. So something like your low purine proteins are things like white fish, eggs, white meat of poultry, the sort of lighter meats. Whereas the darker meats, the thighs, the legs, something like duck, oily fish, those are all much higher purine proteins. Red meats, okay, offal for sure. All right, so we've got chicken breast in there, we've got some greens, we've got a little bit of oil, and that's a low scoring salad. A high scoring salad would be a whole avo. I mean, you could put a whole avo in there, you could put a ton of olives, chicken thigh instead of the breast, greens, you've got quite a few tablespoons of oil, not teaspoons, you've got tablespoons there, okay? And then if you were somewhere between the two, you would have to experiment. And this is typically, I find, where most people struggle, is that often when they come to me, they say, tell me what to eat. Now, that, I can't, because I really don't know what would work for you. I can give you guidelines, but I really can't tell you what would work for you. And secondly, I'm not really that interested in being that practitioner. What I want to do is I want to teach you to learn what you need. There's absolutely no point in you relying on someone external for the rest of your life to tell you where you need to adjust so that you stay in good shape and good health and all the rest of it. You might as well learn that stuff now. And then once you perfect it, you've got it for life. It's a skill that you have forevermore. And it's going to help you become more intuitive with the way that you eat. So you're going to have to experiment with a couple of different things, and you can see that it's not a science. There's no formula here for what might work for Elsinore might not work for you, Jenny, and vice versa. So one of you might be, yes, I can have a whole avo, and the big score, and someone else is going to be equally hungry, but then they're going to have to manage something that's somewhere in between. Okay, so there's no telling. I actually can't, I've got, for some reason, my presentation is set up differently today. It's showing differently, so I can't actually read. This says ratios of carbs, proteins, and fats, different in each, yes, despite the meal looking the same, precisely. So it's a salad, but it's a very different looking salad depending on your outcomes of that score. Does that make sense I understand that it might be hard to apply, but does that make sense from a basic assessment point of view? Elsinore?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
Happy? All right, good. All right, so whether it's a menstrual cycle or the carb cycling, you need to obviously allow, that must be what informs your carb intake. So if I'm on, for example, right now, starting yesterday, I was on a high carb aspect of my cycle. So I'm on day 24 today, 23 yesterday. So I'm going on high carb until my period starts again. So I then know that I can bring more carbs into any given meal, and I should be able to manage it from a blood sugar point of view. Okay, but that is always what informs how much carb I bring in. So if you're not on a carb cycling day, or you're not in that point of the menstrual cycle where you can bring high carbs in, you can make your salad high carb in the sense that it's got more vegetable matter in it than anything else. Whereas if I'm in a high carb day, I could even put butternut and beetroot and root vegetables in there. That's going to really raise the carb level. So you still need that to inform your choices of carbs, if that makes sense. Okay, and the point, of course, of assessing yourself before and then after is to understand what kind of protein, fat, and carb you need, and in what ratios. And this is the very tricky part. You need to work out what proteins will and won't work for you, because each one will behave very differently in the body depending on the purine content. So you can see dark versus light meat, oily versus white fish, eggs, are different to dairy, which is different to nuts. So you might find some things work for you and some things don't. So as an example, for me personally, when I first started doing this, it was probably a good 15, 16 years ago, working specifically with the metabolic typing stuff. And I had gone from, I'd been vegetarian for 10 years prior to that, and I really wasn't in very good health because of it. I'm not born to be a vegetarian. I'm an omnivore for sure. So I do very well on meat. And I had done quite badly as a vegetarian. I wasn't lean. I got sick often. I was quite sort of a little bit almost like bloated, Anyway, so I read this thing and the science made absolute sense to me. I was quite a bit stunned by the idea that I should be having a lot more red meats, offal, etc. Makes sense from my genetic heritage. I'm as English as they come, although I spent my life in South Africa. I'm descendant from Edward III and was born in the UK. So it's like as English as it comes. So it means that my genetic heritage is cold country heritage. So I work very well as if I had lived here all my life, because it's generally cold. And if I went back 10,000 years, what could I have sourced in this country, on this land? It would have been free-ranging game, cold water fish, which would have been oily, and not much carbohydrate. So what I read made sense to me, and I was prepared to give it a go. So I ended up bringing a lot more protein, animal protein in, a lot more fat in. And for the first 3 months, it worked really, really well at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This was before I brought intermittent fasting in. And then literally within 3 months, I started feeling absolutely shattered by my breakfast, which was always, a more animal protein with a lot of fat in it. I'd find that I would fall asleep just about on the tube. I just wanted to go back home and go to bed. So then I thought, okay, let's use, because then we got involved in kind of looking at this feedback and the assessing and all the rest of it. So I then realized that actually there's way too much protein and fat for me at breakfast. And in fact, my appetite is very, very light in the mornings. These days, I just don't eat, obviously, because I'm fasting. But even when I was not fasting, I'm not really interested in English breakfast. The big works. Give me a croissant, or, if I'm going out with mates, maybe I'll have a muffin or or maybe just coffee, a cappuccino. So I switched and I did much, much better on a very light, carbohydrate heavy breakfast with very little fat and very little protein. For me, now that I don't do breakfast, that works very well for me. At lunchtime, I'm aware that if I bring in any kind of animal protein, I'm okay if I bring starch in. So if I bring rice with that, or even I've got a lovely gluten-free loaf of bread that Waitrose do. If I have some of that with animal protein, I feel great. I'm energized. I've got everything working for me. If I'm not on a high-carb day, though, and I don't want to bring the bread in or the rice or the starch in, and I just go with greens, like maybe it's summer and it's a salad, etc., I can't add animal protein to that, because if I don't add starch to it, I'm going to want something sweet after I've eaten. So my pattern is I can't have animal protein at lunch unless I bring a starch in. So if I'm not going to bring a starch in, I don't eat animal protein at lunch. I eat a more dairy or vegetarian type of lunch. So it could be a big salad or vegetables with chopped up, cheese and maybe some hummus or other bits and pieces. And I actually do quite well on that, as long as I add a huge amount of fat to my meals. Whereas in the evening, I'll always bring starch in because I sleep better with some starch. And I always bring an animal protein in the evening because I feel good on that. Elsner was saying she feels like she's craving animal protein all the time. And I said to her, that's perfectly fine. You've your Afrikaans heritage. Yes, Boere, yes, die Boere mense. So, you might do very, very well on the animal fleshes, and you might actually do quite well on them at both meals. It's going to be about experimenting with that. So I know what works for me, but it's, I did it thoroughly. I did it for 3 months, and I did the record keeping every single day so that I could work out exactly what was what. And then I was like, okay, I'm in it and I understand it now. And it hasn't really changed in all that time. I mean, that's a long time ago. So it will be very, very much for you to experiment. So I'm okay with tuna, for example, in my salad, and I can even do some salmon at lunchtime. But if I do a white fish, it's going to be a nightmare. The afternoon's going to be a nightmare. I'm going to want something else. I'm going to be like, when you get to the end of the meal and you think, oh, something was missing. So it's very important. It's really important. I can't stress it enough. Okay, you really want to know what you're doing before you go in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. It's very personalized. Very, very personalized. And I think my industry has done the world a disservice by suggesting that you can just follow someone's protocol and you'll be fine. Because it's just not how it works. It's just not. After eating, and the problem, of course, with diets, if you pick up my diet book and I tell you what to do and you do it and then it doesn't work, you can just blame me. But if you have to take responsibility, then you have to do the work. And you will get there, but it's going to be about taking responsibility, and then you've got it. So it's yeah. Anyway, after eating, so within about an hour, you're going to assess how you feel. And again, in those 3 areas, okay? So do you feel satisfied? Do you need something more? Are you craving something? Can you work from one meal to the next without needing a snack? Is your energy better for eating? Could you go and go to gym, an hour after you've eaten? I'm not suggesting you do, but could you? Do you have the energy for it? Emotional well-being, do you feel better for having eaten? And typically, yes, clarity of thought, the ability to focus better, concentrate, those are signs of being emotionally uplifted after eating. And I always used to joke with clients who, when they first came to see me, we'd start unpacking the diet, and I'd say to them, if you are consistently having a fight with your husband every time you have breakfast, it could be your cornflakes that are the problem, not your husband. Because if you're consistently having an incredibly high, just an injection of sugar in the morning, and that's going to affect your mood. So for a lot of people, it takes them into a sort of hyper state, and then they crash and burn. And in that crash and burn, they get very cranky and irritable and headachy and anxious, and all sorts of things that go with that. So that often, and we often don't appreciate that what we eat affects us directly. I mean, it is what comprises or essentially provides the fuel or the basics for our hormones. And our hormones, the hormone level determine our state of mood. And our state of mood then determines our behavior. And our behavior determines our mindset for the day. So it's just completely and utterly directly related to what we choose to eat. If you're consistently getting negative outcomes, then you have to appreciate that you are not fueling yourself correctly. So again, I'm going to give you a beautiful manual way to just tick boxes and to check and see. In fact, I should have inserted it into the slide, but it's very easy to use. You just tick the boxes that apply to you, and then you start to actually see a visual kind of pattern represented through the meals that you choose to eat. If you get a mix of positive and negative, because often that happens, so my suggestion personally is that you just make a note of what you ate so that you remember the meal. Where you go, maybe it's a salad with a whole avo, a round of feta, a chicken leg and olives, and you just write that down. And maybe you say a huge amount of fat on it, olive oil. And so you'll remember that meal, and then within an hour you're going to assess it in terms of what you're going to tick in terms of satiety, energy, or emotional well-being. And you might find that you do brilliantly on that kind of meal, or you might find that there are some mixed reviews. Okay, but either way, it's going to give you some idea of where you might need to make adjustments. So if you do see a mix, you'll know that some elements are working for you, but other elements aren't, and you're going to have to work out what those elements are. So my suggestion is, let's say you have a meal of this salad with all of those things in it because you're really, really hungry and you want to give it a go. And let's say you maybe you don't feel quite satisfied. So let's say you have that very high score salad, and out of that, within an hour after that, you think, oh, I'm so full, but I'm actually still hungry. Now that's a sign, and this will be, in the notes that I give you, that's a sign of having too much fat in a meal. So fat is very energy dense, so you get full from it. But because it's not a lot, it's not high volume, it's just high energy, you can still feel hungry. So it's like you can be full of fat, but actually still hungry at the same time. And so you might need to adjust the fat content of that and maybe bring more protein in or a bit more carb in and bring that fat content down in order to feel satisfied and full and not like you're needing more food. Okay. And I know that, this often sounds like an impossible task. And it did to me when I first looked at this. And I thought, how the hell? There's so many variables. How do you do this? My suggestion is that you keep the same meal and you keep that same meal every time you have a similar score and you work on it until you get the right combination. So every time you have that, let's say you score 19 on a lunch, you just try that same meal, but with different variations. So one day you do it with 5 tablespoons of oil, and the next day you do it with 1 tablespoon of oil, and you just see which one works better. And then if it makes no difference, then you just choose a middle ground for oil, and then you choose maybe chicken breast with that meal, or try chicken leg with that meal, or try oily salmon, or try something else. And eventually you'll get to the point where you go, oh, that's the combination I need. It's a lighter protein with much more fat and not too much in the way of carbs, for example. Do you get my point? So it's what I'm saying, I guess, is that it's not really easy, but you want to just keep going. And neither of you this really relates to. I mean, it's for when you've got a menstrual cycle. Elsa, I mean, we've got to establish you should still be ovulating. It's just that you're not seeing the consequences of the cycle with the loop in. So ideally, you want to run through an entire month of doing the feedback so that you get a sense of where your appetite might or might not shift in your period or in your menstrual cycle. Any questions on that before we go on? It's complex, and as I say, when I give you the notes, you will have more opportunity to. It might be worth scribbling down some notes as you go, but you'll get a much better sense of what this particular thing means and what that particular thing means, and you can therefore adjust. Any questions on this? And we can always revisit this. So if we get to, let's say you give it a go for the next week or two, and you struggle with some aspects, we can certainly come back to it and we can talk about, okay, well, when I did this, I felt this, but I wasn't sure what it meant. What should I do with that? And we can do a bit of a Q&A around it. Elsa, are you okay? Yeah.
Yes, I just want to ask something. The 313, that's what I'm going to do. But so I don't do intermittent fasting then. I leave it then all alone, or do I do it and then for 3 days, lunch and dinner, I have low carbs, and then 1 day high carbs, and then 3 days low? I don't understand that. I don't know how I must do it.
You just told me how. You've got it. Repeat that
I've
again.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Repeat that again.
I do intermittent fasting. I don't eat breakfast. So lunch for 3 days, I do low carb.
And dinner.
day, and dinner, and then 1 day high carbs with intermittent fasting, and then 3 days again low carbs.
Yes, perfect.
No breakfast,
Yeah,
only
yeah.
food.
And I
Okay.
suggested that you carry on intermittent fasting because we weren't sure, maybe until you get some answer from your GP and he says, oh no, you're definitely ovulating at this point or that point or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, we can't work out where you are. So I think it's probably beneficial. And Jenny, because you don't get your period anymore, it's definitely worth staying with that intermittent fasting. In my opinion, I think it's worth continuing to do because we're just at that age where we have less margin. Okay, there's less margin for playing around with adding food. And you're both, I think, relatively comfortable with the intermittent fasting. So yes, Elsner, that's correct. That's correct. Okay. And again, if you do bring in a breakfast on that on that middle day, it's not a train smash. So you might want to, if you're going to see a mate at a coffee shop or something and you're going to meet up at breakfast time, you might as well make it on that day. And then if you do have breakfast, that's great. It's not a big problem.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
I had breakfast last week, Friday. I went out with friends.
Nice.
But then I didn't eat lunch because I couldn't. I was just too full. I had rosti with salmon and a poached egg.
Nice.
And I didn't eat lunch and then I eat dinner again. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly what I would do if I ended up going out for breakfast. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you generally find that food actually fills you quite substantially when you have it that early when you have breakfast.
And that meal was very good for me. I stayed full in the late afternoon.
Lovely, yeah, perfect. That's a very good sign. That's a very good sign. You want to feel very energized. You want to feel that you last for a hell of a long time on that meal. And that's the reason we bring in a lot of fat, is because it provides a lot of energy. And the irony, Jenny, are you okay? You look so exhausted.
That's this time of the night. That's me.
Oh, I'm sorry. You girls, just let me know if you feel that you want to maybe do it a little bit earlier. We can see if we can organize it, because I don't want you nodding off while you're trying to focus. So maybe
it's just there's
no, I know you're not
calling or demanding me.
Okay, so just you can both send me a message if you feel you want to do it earlier. We can talk about it. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else relating to that question, Elsner. But I think, so a very good sign for both of you is a meal. For example, that salad that I spoke about, that high score salad, I won't be hungry for about 6 or 7 hours after that. I mean, if I add an avo and the olives and the, if I add the chicken, I won't add the chicken, but I could add tuna, for example, and I'll add probably as much as 4, 5, 6 tablespoons of olive oil. That's me done. I mean, if I have that later in the afternoon, I don't need dinner. So you want to find those meals. Those are the meals you want. Those are really satisfying meals. Okay.
So I don't have to be scared of the rosti because I always feel if I eat the so that's good.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's not like you're doing it every day. And all you do is adjust the rest of the day. So if it's an enormous amount of rosti, which is just your potato, there's probably a bit of flour in there. So but I mean, if that's all you've got to do is gauge that. So remember, Elsa, we said for now, until I cover the very, very big topic of nutritional guidelines with you, you just go online and go, how many carbs in a piece of rosti? And it might say, well, medium-sized rosti probably will give you like 20 grams of carbs. And you go, oh, okay, well, there's more or less 20 grams of carbs. So later in the day, I'll just make sure I don't have more than 10 or whatever you're on in terms of the. So it's not, I don't want you to be pedantic about it. I don't want you to be using apps and things. I just think Google's a good idea for now. So you get a general idea. I know, for example, a slice of my gluten-free bread is around about 9 grams of carbs. So every time I have a slice of bread, or if I have an oat cracker, it's 3 grams. So I know that if I have 3 crackers together, it's like 10 grams, or a slice of toast, it's 10 grams. So I just use that accordingly. And it's just a general thing. And I know if I have an orange, it's generally around about maybe 12 to 15 grams of carbs. So if I have an orange, I more or less bring that. I'm not ever sitting, writing it out, weighing it, doing that kind of thing. I'm just guesstimating. We don't want to get too pedantic about it. Okay. Okay, so looking at how much, because this is often a question that's asked, and again, it's not one I can answer. You have to dictate, well, you have to experiment. For me personally, I eat big meals. I can't stand, don't give me like, oh, I've got, some clients that just eat these little bird meals. In fact, if I compare myself to Bonnie, I eat more than he does. Right? And he's got sort of a mix of German Iranian, but the Iranian is obviously much more prevalent because he can't bear fat and he can eat a lot of carbs, whereas I'm the exact opposite. And so it's quite interesting to just, if you get into the sort of instinctive eating, you'll notice people eat big, they eat small, and again we think that there's one way to do it. So, oh, you mustn't eat too big a meal at once, which is not true, actually. I really enjoy a large meal. I want to feel satisfied, I want to feel full, and I want to feel like, I don't have to eat again for a while. And I really enjoy my food. So I want to have something decent in that meal. Some people are not really bothered. He can just like forget about eating. I can never forget about eating. Who can forget about eating? It's like, what? Some people say, oh, just give me a pill. I'm like, oh, you're mad. I love the process of eating. So again, we're all different. There's no right way to do it. The only thing that you're looking for is to make sure you don't feel stuffed when you eat. You want to eat to about 80% capacity. You want to get to that point where you go, oh, okay, I'm gonna be uncomfortable if I eat anymore, and that's when you stop. Okay. Generally, I've said don't eat too much sugar, overconsume protein. If you're ketoing and you overeat protein, the protein can be converted into glucose. So you can cause the same problems you can cause with carbs, you can cause through protein on a keto diet or on a keto type diet. So, but neither of you, I can't see either of you kind of getting to that point. And we can always have a look at more specifically at your meals if you want to send me a copy of your feedback forms, for example, and you're interested to know. I'm happy to look at some of those days for you. Okay, and then yes, as I say, don't eat to the point of feeling really uncomfortable. Eat slowly, chew thoroughly. We're going to deal with that when we deal with digestion. And then wait before you, if you're one of those people like me who, if I have something really delicious, I'm always going to want a second plate. But I always just try and hold off on that because sometimes it's just about taste. It's not about need. It's not like I need the energy. I just like the taste. So some of the symptoms, and this is something you'll pick up when I send you the forms. Too much fat or the wrong type of protein at the meal you just had can lead to the sense of lethargy and sleepiness, feeling down, that full but still hungry that I spoke about, this just general sluggishness. Craving teas and coffees there, and so is craving something sweet. But it's very, very rare. In fact, I'm not sure I can say that I've ever had a client who's had those symptoms from having too much fat. Typically, most people undereat fat, they don't overeat it. Nausea after eating will be a liver thing. So you might want to just cut back and then reintroduce slowly. It'll just be because your gallbladder and your liver are struggling. You might not even have a gallbladder. Have either of you had the gallbladder removed?
No.
Marvelous. Okay, try and keep your gallbladder. It's quite important. But if you were, for some people, they struggle a little bit with the fat content, they get nauseous. And then too many carbs in the reverse can lead to the anxiety, the headache, feeling hungry, craving sweets. So you can see craving sweets happens whether you go extreme fat or whether you go extreme carb. On the carb side, tired but wired and unstable energy. So these sort of ADHD type headspace. So that gives you a sort of quick glance at, okay, if that big salad with 5 tablespoons of fat made me feel quite tired afterwards, it definitely wasn't because I had carbs that took me into a high and then troughed me, because there were no carbs essentially in that meal. So if that sluggishness, that exhaustion must be related to too much fat or the wrong kind of protein. So I'm going to probably cut back on, to be fair, the protein is more about, for me, if I've had the wrong protein, that will cause me to crave sugar. I don't generally feel tired from the wrong kind of protein. I get a need for something sweet if I have the wrong kind. Whereas if I feel tired, it might be from too much fat. So, but again, because you're different to me, you may find that it is different for you. But here you've got these twos. You've got the highs and you've got the lows. So you've got the pick me up is the ADHD, the high energy is more around too much carbohydrate, and the downers are generally around too much fat and possibly the wrong kind of protein. Okay, so the flatter you feel, the more likely it's about too much fat, and the more like hyper you feel, the more likely it is relating to too much carb, especially too much high sugar release carb. Okay, we'll deal with that with the nutritional guidelines. So yeah, you can see there are lots of variables that you need to kind of think about and experiment with. And then just to say, in terms of cravings, because cravings are a big one for a lot of people, I think that there are 3 areas that we need to watch for. The one is it a craving? Is it a biochemical drive for a food, or is it a habit, or is it just desire because you like the taste of something? And all of them are different. So if you do get a craving, which is, where you almost have to sit on your hands, it's such a strong desire for something. You have to sit on your hands to stop you eating it. That suggests a craving, and it suggests that you didn't fuel yourself correctly at the last meal. Okay, that's what a craving tells you. The minute it's a craving, a true craving, it's because you didn't fuel yourself correctly. So that's very important to note. You need to be aware of that. So if you had that salad and you desperately needed something sweet afterwards, you go back to that and you say, okay, why would I crave sweets? I'm either going to crave sweets from too much fat, or I'm going to crave sweets from too much carb. Okay, there wasn't carb in there, so it's definitely not that. Oh, okay, that's too much fat for me. So instead of having the sugar at that point, by the way, let's just munch on a carrot, or have half an apple, or have an orange, or something that will just pick you back up, and you should stabilize. Okay, rather than go and have that, I don't know, that bar of chocolate or the whatever. Rather eat something that's got high carbs in it, but that's a healthy high carb, and see if it settles you down. You want to always be in homeostasis. You never want to be flat or hyper. You want to be here in the middle. So if you were the reverse, let's say I had that salad and I felt really, really kind of very sluggish, I would have the carrot or half an apple or something. If I felt hyper because I'd had too much carb in a particular meal, I'd probably go and have maybe an egg, a boiled egg or something, or maybe I would have macadamia nuts to kind of bring me down, or maybe I'd have very, very fatty biltong or something, or Durvos, and that should bring me back down to a moderate place, a medium place, balance. Okay, so you need to assess constantly what you just had if you've got this craving happening, okay? Have a think about what you ate. Excuse me. It may become obvious to you what's missing. If it is obvious to you, add the thing that's missing. Wait 10, 15, 20 minutes and see if it settles you down. It should. If it doesn't, have whatever it is you're craving. Don't sit there and, have to sit on your hands. Just have the thing. It's not going to kill you. And then the next time round, we try the same meal again, but adjust it. So again, you want to do it at the same time of day with the same pre-meal assessment score. So always work within the same parameters, and then just test something slightly different. And then if you have to correct again using something different. See if it works, see if it doesn't. Okay. Cravings will always cease if you've put the right macronutrient ratios in. It will. And that's the beauty of working. I've said to you before, I often have clients say to me, oh, they have terrible, terrible cravings. And then when I say to them, we can probably fix that in one meal, they are usually very, they usually don't believe me. And then when they are so excited when they realize it's true. And it's almost always by adding more fat into the diet. That cuts the sugar cravings like that. Because most people don't add enough fat. So try it and see what happens if you do have the cravings. Yes. Elsna?
I just want to ask something.
Yeah.
So if I want to make my fat higher, will it be better to put the olive oil over or eat the avo?
But either, both.
So the one won't be, they will be exactly the same. The one isn't going to, if I eat half an avo instead of 8 tablespoons of olive oil, are those the same? Is it the same?
No, not necessarily. So it depends. So for example, at a lunch, I could have an avo plus my 5 tablespoons of oil because that's how much fat I need. You might not need that much fat. So you might then get to the point where half an avo is enough fat, or it might not be. So I can't answer that in any way except to say experiment with it. Have half an avo and have 3 tablespoons of oil and see how you feel. And then if that feels like you feel nauseous or you feel tired or you just feel full but still hungry, then next time have just the avo, and then another time have no avo and just have the fat, and see which one works better for you. It's a constant, for a period, it's a constant kind of back and forth until you get to the point, and this is a beautiful place to be, and this is where I want to take you to, is you can walk into your kitchen, see what's available to you, and you will automatically pick up the foods you need in the amount that you need, and you'll eat it and you'll feel satisfied. You won't even think about, if I'm putting butter on my toast, I mean, I know I want it thick, I want bite marks in it, it must look like cheese. Then I'm satisfied. Okay? Then I'll feel great on that. Whereas if I don't put that much fat in, I'm going to be hungry faster. And so, as I say, I've really made the effort to learn my own requirements, my own needs. So you have to go through that process, and that's slightly scary because it's like, well, what if I put too much fat in? Well, so what? It's one meal. You're going to try it, and you're going to try it over a period. And in general, eating excessive fat is not going to make you fat because you're going to work it out relatively quickly. So, you're going to have symptoms that are going to tell you where to go on the next meal. And so you're just adjusting and you're constantly kind of finding your happy place. The other thing I was going to say, when you have a craving, it's quite interesting. I find that brushing teeth thing works bloody well for clients because it's like you've got this signal in your head. When you brush your teeth in the evening, your brain goes, we're done. So sometimes if you've got that thing where you're sitting down and you're thinking, could really do with something, and it might actually, in fact, it probably works better for a habit than it does for a craving. But just go and brush your teeth and see what happens. It's quite interesting.
I brush my teeth a minimum of 4 times a day.
Okay.
My entire life.
Oh, really?
That's my problem.
Okay, well, there you go. So maybe maybe that works. Okay, so habit is typically, it's like I go to the movies and I buy popcorn, or I sit down with my husband in the evening and with a bottle of wine between us, or chocolate, or, that kind of thing, or, whatever. You tie 2 things together. You tie behavior or an activity and a food stuff, and that's dangerous if it's a poor habit. So you just have to change for a short enough period, for at least 3 weeks. You want to change the habits, you want to change the activity and the food pairing, okay? So I reckon if you've got someone that maybe if you've got a husband or partner, you can do something with them like trivial or chess, or, I don't know, do a different thing so that you cultivate a different sort of habit. And all you're doing is trying to break it. If you're on your own and you have a tendency to sit down in the evening and watch a movie and you pull out the crisps, then do something different. Read a book, listen to music, go for a walk, you just want to break that association. And it's not to say that you can't go back to watching a movie, but you want to break the association first. Then you can go back to the movie and you'll find that you can do that without the bag of crisps moving forward. Okay. So that's just that's something that you just want to work on because it's helpful to break it. And desire, there's nothing wrong with desire. You know, when you're ready to do those moments where you let your hair down, or you've got your higher carb day and you decide, you know what, I haven't had a piece of cheesecake from my favorite coffee shop for a while. That's what I'm going to do. And, you know, often these you want to plan ahead of time. So for me, I think it was always, Jenny, if I think of Vovo in PE, it was like their cheesecake or something. And I just loved it. So I would set, and I would know my high carb day was like Thursday. So I would set some time aside, take my book, have a cup of coffee and their cheesecake on Thursday because that was my high carb day. And then it's planned. And it's like, I know it's coming. I'm looking forward to it. And when it's done, it's great. I've done it without guilt or remorse, and I feel good, and I walk away, and it was a great experience. So desire is fine. That's perfectly fine. But desire tends to allow you to pre-plan, so that you don't ever feel like you're in a situation where you have to have. Because I think it's that out of control feeling that leads to poor behavior. And that's often the baby out with the bathwater, where we go, screw it. Okay, I'm going to have the cheesecake, and then I'm going to have the bag of crisps and a bottle of wine in the evening because now I've screwed it all up, which is a silly way to do it. Okay. And then lastly, eating in the evening. So be aware, obviously, you know, as we shut down, systems shut down and they tick over at a very much lower level, it really isn't good to put a whole ton of fuel into those cells and then ask them to deal with that. There's a lot of damage that can occur at cellular level because you've put a whole ton of fuel in that can't actually be managed. So you can see blood sugar problems and weight gains are higher if we eat later. That's just a general thing. In fact, there's a very well-known fact that people who do night shifts are larger than people who don't. So, you know, nurses, doctors overnight, because of the impact on their neurotransmitters and their mood states, their tendency is to eat more carbs. Try and wait 3 hours before you go to sleep. But again, we're all quite different. So I'm not a good one for, don't give me a light dinner. I'm sorry, got a frog sitting there. I don't want a light dinner. I want something that is serious, and I want my starch in it because then I'm going to sleep better. And the next person might prefer a lighter dinner and a heavier lunch. You have to work it out, and you're going to work it out according to your appetite, which is the pre-meal assessment. So if my evening score is between 1 and 7, then I'm probably going to be fine with something light. But if it's between, you know, whatever and 21, then chances are I need something heavier. Okay, so you need to just kind of be testing constantly to see where you're at, but try always to leave those 3 hours. I know that for me, if I eat outside of the 3 hours, I'll definitely need a snack before I go to sleep because I don't do well going to sleep hungry. If there's even a sense of needing, even a sense of being this niggly kind of slightly empty feeling, I don't enjoy going to sleep like that. And often I might have a bad night because I'm just not in a good place fuel-wise. Okay, so that's a fairly that's a big part of moving forward for you girls, because this is fundamental to your unique biochemistry. This is an area that you really, really want to do the work. This is where you're going to find out how to look after yourself moving forward. From a dietary point of view. So I can't overemphasize the benefits of working with it. And I will, as I say, I'll send you the notes. They're 3 pages. One is just a quick cheat, a sort of cheat sheet that I would suggest you keep somewhere I don't know, in a handbag or up on your fridge or in both places. Just refer to it very, very, just to get a quick sense of where you're at. And the other two are more intensive. One is the pre-meal assessment, one is post-meal assessment, and they take a little bit more time. And when I say a little bit more time, maybe 2 minutes. So it's very, very quick to use. And you decide whether you want to print it out and do it in hard copy or just do it online and then store them somewhere. And if you want me to have a look at them at some point, just let me know, and I can do that and give you feedback. Okay, but let's try and get you doing that for the next week, and then you can always give feedback. And then will you let me know? Let's end now because you guys